Welcome back, everyone. Hard to believe this is our last session of the Shameless Sexuality Conference. Our last session at the inaugural Shameless Sexuality Life After Purity Culture Conference features my friend, Alice Greczyn. Alice and I met a few years ago chatting about my Divorcing Religion workshop. She went on to speak at the inaugural Conference on Religious Trauma in 2021. And it was there that I recognized her intellectual prowess and the powerful voice she brings to the religious trauma recovery community. In addition to being a successful actress, Alice is the creator of the Dare to Doubt website, offering resources for those detaching from harmful belief systems. And most recently, she's the author of Wayward, a memoir of spiritual warfare and sexual purity. Alice's talk today is called The Betrayal of Purity Culture and How I Healed. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you so much, Janice. It's such a pleasure to be here. And hello to everyone. So I am going to be reading from my teleprompter like I usually do when I do these virtual conferences. So if my eyes go down, it's not that I'm not engaged with you folks. I'm just wanting to make sure that I'm presenting you with accurate information to the best of my ability. So I'm going to tell you guys the story of how I nearly ended up in an arranged marriage. It started off as a normal September afternoon. I was standing at my kitchen stove, one of those janky ones with coils for burners, and my friend Luke was sitting at the table next to me while I made us dinner. I was telling him about a recent hike I went on with a new guy friend of mine, when suddenly Luke's whole demeanor shifted. His shoulders tensed and his usually gentle voice took a sharp edge. He started interrogating me, asking who was this guy? Did he like me? Did I like him? I struggled to answer Luke's questions without showing my nervousness. I'd never seen him so upset before, and I'd known him for a couple of years. His questions also confused me because Luke knew I didn't date. He knew I was saving myself for my future husband and that I'd never even kissed or held hands with a guy. I figured Luke was just being overprotective. I was 17. And since he was 20 and like an older brother to me, I told myself that he was just looking out for my safety. But his questions wouldn't stop. He seemed suspicious, angry even. Finally, I asked him about it. It seems like you're acting jealous, I managed to say. Why? Because, Luke said, staring straight into my eyes, God told me you're my future wife. I believed him instantly. It didn't occur to me to ask Luke how he heard God tell him I was his future wife, because I never knew how God told anyone anything. I did know that Luke would never lie about something like this, and so I gripped the stove for balance as the light seemed to tunnel out of the kitchen. Something inside me wanted to cry out and protest, to tell Luke that he couldn't be my future husband because I didn't love him, not in that way. But I silenced that cry out of sheer terror. I believed Luke's revelation was God's revelation, and I couldn't go against God. I didn't have time to think, and so I made the split-second decision to go along with it. I felt I had to go along with it, because to do otherwise would be to defy God, and to defy God would allow Satan to drag me to hell. I was sitting on my couch in numb silence when Luke called my dad to formally ask for my hand in marriage. I didn't realize how much I was hoping my father would say no until Luke's face broke into a smile, and my heart felt like someone dropped it. Luke passed me the phone, and I heard my dad tell me that God had shown him a while ago that Luke was the man I would marry. Luke called his mother next, and as though God wanted to make extra sure that I was convinced marrying Luke was his will, Luke's mom said that she too had heard from God that I was going to marry her son. God's will couldn't have been clearer. When the calls were finished, I turned to Luke, forcing another smile I didn't feel. So are we engaged now? I asked. He grinned at me. Yeah, I guess we are. And it didn't seem possible. I'd never had a boyfriend, and now I had a fiance. I blinked back tears, not knowing why I was so shocked. I'd been groomed for that arrangement my whole life. I grew up in what is now called purity culture. Purity culture taught me that my love life would unfold in 3 ways. 1, I would remain a virgin until my wedding night and I wouldn't so much as hold hands with a guy until I was engaged to him. 2, as a girl, I would dress modestly and be faithful to my husband all the days of my life, including before I knew him. And 3, I would never date, but I would know who my future husband was because God would confirm it through my spiritual elders, and especially through my dad. The exchange for my fidelity, if I abided by these 3 rules, which of course were called guidelines because we didn't want to think of ourselves as legalistic, was that God would reward me with a love story more romantic and passionate than I had ever dreamed. Purity culture is based on the belief that sex should only be had within heterosexual marriage, and that all lustful thoughts before marriage are sinful. In the Christian churches of my upbringing, merely having a crush on somebody was not only a sin, but an act of betrayal toward my future spouse. One youth pastor said that we girls were like white porcelain dishes, and when we gave ourselves away, we let people spit all over our dish. What man would ever want to marry us and eat off a dirty dish? The Bible says that among God's holy people, there must be not even a hint of sexual impurity. This teaching played out in my youth groups, with girls being handed oversized t-shirts if they showed up in a tank top that bared their arms. It meant boys were urged to publicly repent if they watched pornography, so the rest of us could hold him accountable for his sin. It meant that when I was accused of flirting with all the guys on a youth group mission trip, I had to go to each one of them personally with a pastor and apologize to him for being a distraction. My crime was wearing cargo shorts and treating the guys too much like actual brothers instead of brothers in Christ, as evidenced by my comfortability around them. That was the first time I became aware that the lust of men was my fault. The shame that imprinted itself in me left long-lasting scars, and by the time I was betrothed to Luke, I was instilled with a fear of my womanhood and resigned to the fact that my life would be ruled by the men God placed in it. Patriarchy is an important aspect of purity culture. Boys are also indoctrinated with the belief that they need to keep themselves pure until marriage, but there's an inherent double standard in Judeo-Christianity that girls and women bear the brunt of. For instance, there's no biblically mandated test for a male's virginity like there is for females. In the Bible, girls are tested for their virginity by being sent to their wedding night chambers with a white sheet. If there's no blood on the sheet after the groom is done having sex with her, the girl is then dragged to the front of her father's house and stoned to death for not being a virgin. Today, there are still cultures that punish girls and women for not bleeding on their wedding night sheets. From Judaism to Hinduism, Mormonism to Islam, most girls are expected to be virgins when they marry. The consequences for not being a virgin bride can range from social shunning to strangulation. Today in evangelical America, as we just saw in Sarah's presentation right before this, we have things like purity balls, where girls in white dresses make vows of celibacy to God and to their fathers, who in turn vow to protect their daughters' chastity until they give them away in marriage. Today, some fundamentalist parents plan matchmaking retreats where they can arrange marriages for their teenagers. The girls are reported to be between the ages of 13 and 20, so they can be fruitful and multiply. And the parents of a chosen groom might pay the girl's parents a bride price. Some call this sex trafficking, and child marriage is currently banned in only 7 of the US 50 states. I never went to a purity ball, but when my dad gave Luke permission to marry me, it absolutely felt like an arranged marriage. I was betrothed to a man not of my choosing, but of his, our parents, and God's. I use the word betrothed because that's what it felt like. That's the word the Bible uses to describe the giving away of a girl from one man to another. Women in the Bible don't marry for love. A girl in the Bible does not get engaged. There's no proposal. She is never asked. She is betrothed. My story unfolded just as the books and sermons of purity culture said it should. I'd been faithful to God and my future husband in body, heart, and mind. I dressed modestly and turned down dates. When my future husband was revealed, my father and other spiritual elders confirmed it, affirming Luke was not acting on his fleshly desires, but in accordance with God's will. The only part of my story that didn't go according to the script was as inconsequential as it was devastating. I didn't love my future husband. I felt nothing romantic or passionate for him. The betrayal of purity culture for me was that I had held up my end of the bargain, and God had not held up his. That his reward for my faithfulness was revealed to be Luke, a man for whom I felt nothing more than friendship, utterly crushed me. Ultimately, I decided to end my betrothal. And if you're curious to learn more about it, I did write a book. But ending my betrothal was and remains the scariest thing that I've ever done. Because I wasn't just ending a betrothal or breaking up with a lover. I was telling Satan for the first time that he could have me. It was my first act of overt disobedience toward God. A few years later, I lost my faith. With the loss of my faith came the freedom to finally have sex. And after so many years of keeping myself pure and saving myself for one man and one man only, I was free to sleep with anyone I wanted. And I tried. But the teachings of purity culture were deeply ingrained in me. I began having anxiety attacks after sex. These anxiety attacks left me crying and hyperventilating in my bed as I desperately tried to remind myself that there was no devil to fear and that I had done nothing wrong to be ashamed of. But 2 decades of programming is hard to undo, as I'm sure many of you know. Purity culture had programmed me, the way it's programmed so many others, to fuse shame and fear with sex. I learned that just because our minds accept that something is no longer true, our neurological wiring is not able to simply undo itself, and my wires of fear, shame, and sex were closely wound together. Purity culture taught me that my worth was in my virginity, and on a subconscious level, losing my virginity meant losing my worth. I know I'm one of the lucky ones. I may have found myself facing an arranged marriage at 17, and I may have suffered anxiety attacks after sex as a young adult, but I know my struggles pale in comparison to the sexual traumas others go through. The reason I choose to share my experiences is that I also know I'm not alone. If you grew up like me, with every aspect of your sexual purity being controlled, and if, like me, you've downplayed the after effects of purity culture because you worry no one will take you seriously, or maybe you feel like you can't even take yourself seriously, I hope it might validate you, as it validated me, to know that symptoms of religious trauma and sexual trauma can often go hand in hand. Religion is not always benign, and abuse is not always invasive. What purity culture and sexual abuse have in common is the violation of your sexual agency. Both teach you that your body belongs to someone else, that your needs and wants don't matter, and that the consequences of resistance could be high, even death. Is it any wonder then to learn that the side effects of purity culture and the side effects of sexual abuse can be so similar? In the early 2000s, therapy offices across the United States saw a sudden spike of young adults seeking treatment for what has since been described as an epidemic of shame. One of the first therapists to notice this epidemic was Dr. Tina Shermer-Sellers. She said that the symptoms she was seeing were exactly the same symptoms that she might see in someone who was sexually abused. What made it so puzzling was that many of these young people insisted they'd never been sexually abused. Some had no sexual experience at all. The timing of the surge of young people seeking help for sexual trauma, often with no sexual experience, pointed Dr. Tina to the boom of purity culture in the mid to late 90s. This was the era of promise rings and purity retreats, of abstinence-only sex ed and books like I Kissed Dating Goodbye. This was the era of my youth. Author Linda K. Klein describes in her book Pure how my generation was bombarded at home, at church, and at school with the message that sex was wrong and our bodies were sinful. We became adults in the early and mid-2000s, and it was then that therapists began to see the repercussions of what is now called purity culture. Some of these repercussions resemble post-traumatic stress disorder, panic attacks, paranoia, nightmares, dissociative states, depression, eating disorders, self-harm. Many of these symptoms remain dormant until they're triggered by something, sometimes something as light as kissing or even just talking about sex. One of the most devastating repercussions is a condition some women get called vaginismus. Vaginismus causes an involuntary tightening of the muscles around the vagina, making sex extremely painful and often impossible. Sometimes vaginismus is a symptom of sexual assault. Other times it's a symptom of purity culture. I know the story of one virgin bride who discovered she had vaginismus. She was very much looking forward to having sex with her husband, But every time they tried in the months following their wedding, her body shut down in pain, blocking him from entering her. She had unwittingly trained her body to shut down this way through years of shutting down any sexual thoughts or sensations whatsoever. Sex was so painful that she ended up having to have surgery. Then there's the story of a girl who had surgery because she wanted sex with her husband to be painful. She'd lost her virginity in college, and when she became engaged, she opted to have hymen reconstruction surgery. She wanted to be a born-again virgin on her wedding night and have the blood from a newly torn hymen to prove it. Religion often teaches girls that purity means pain, one way or another. Of course, women are not the only ones affected by the harmful teachings of purity culture. In her book, Pure, Klein shares an observation from one of her interviewees who points out that if women are told their bodies are evil, men are taught that their minds are. The Bible teaches that simply looking at a woman lustfully is the same as committing adultery with her. And the punishment Jesus advises is gouging out your eyes if they cause you to lust and chopping off your hand if it causes you to sin. Though these verses are often interpreted as metaphors in the modern day church, they're widely construed as dictates against lust and masturbation. When boys and men fail to suppress their natural urges, many believe themselves worthy of punishment, including checking themselves into months-long rehabilitation centers, convinced they have sex addictions. Others struggle for years with what one guy I know simply describes as crippling shame. After being kicked out of his religious university for having sex with his girlfriend, another man I know of committed suicide. Shame can be deadly. Because many doctors and therapists are afraid of being seen as anti-religious if they connect a patient's sexual trauma to their spiritual beliefs, and also because of the immense shame surrounding sex in religious communities, many people suffer in loneliness and silence, going untreated. But the good news is that symptoms of sexual trauma resulting from purity culture often can be treated. So everyone's path to healing is unique. And one of the most common questions that I get asked now is how exactly I healed from the shame of purity culture. I'll share with you my story, and then I'll share 5 tips for healing from the shame of purity culture that will hopefully inspire you on your own path toward healing. So I was in therapy for nearly 3 years following my departure from faith. Therapy helped me work through a lot of the anxiety I had around dating and sex, encouraging me to explore and maintain healthy boundaries as I did so. Another way I found healing was far less expected. Through an unlikely string of events, I started working as an actress and model when I was 17. When I was 18 and still reeling from ending my betrothal to Luke, I accepted the offer of a topless modeling job. I was fully aware that I was in no small way rebelling against purity culture. And rebellion, I learned, is good medicine. Highly recommend. During the photo shoot, something happened to me. Something good. While I stood under black and blue lights, almost completely naked, and while the male photographer was shooting me and making me feel safe, I made a conscious decision that I would let my inhibitions go as I'd never let them go before, and let my body move as I'd never let her move before. And there in that dark, safe space, staring straight into the camera lens, I felt something come over me that I'd never felt before. I felt power. And what is power if not an opposite of shame? The first thing many women do when they leave religious purity culture is rebel against it. Amish girls on Rumspringa might have boudoir photos taken. Women who leave the fundamentalist Mormon church might cut their hair and wear makeup. Ex-Muslim women might trade their burqas for bikinis. Reclaiming power takes many forms, and some may dismiss these actions as juvenile, as an understandable yet overreactive bucking of authority. But I think the motive behind many such rebellions is far deeper, far more profound, and sacredly beautiful. These actions are not only symbols of defiance, they're also symbols of deliverance, of liberation, and the fierce proclamation of self-ownership. We are more than just rebels. We're healers, finding wholeness through the uninhibited embrace of our sensuality. I left that photo shoot feeling like a significant transformation had taken place. And what I know now is that I was experiencing a glimmer of what therapists and coaches might call embodiment, getting out of my head and connecting to the wisdom of my body. That right there sums up the best advice that I feel I can give on recovering from the damage of purity culture. Be in your body. Because of that experience I had modeling, I started taking pole dancing classes and letting myself move sensually without fear of condemnation or accountability or shame allowed my body to release years of stored up shame and other baggage that I had. Now, I'm not saying everyone needs to do a topless photo shoot or learn how to pole dance in order to recover from purity culture. So in addition to therapy, here's 5 other tips that I like to share when people ask me how they might begin healing from the shame left over from purity culture. And maybe only one of these will speak to you, maybe none of them will. I mean it when I say that I can only really speak from my own personal experience. But I hope what you might take away from me sharing my truth is the encouragement to find and live in your own. So here are 5 ideas to get your wheels turning. 1, go to a sex shop. The people who work in sex shops are some of my favorite people on earth because they are earthy. They cannot be phased, and they have seen it all. Being around people who are so comfortable with sex is a healthy way to counterbalance the stigma and shame of coming from a background where most sex was forbidden. You don't even have to go to a sex shop in your own town. You can drive to another one where you don't have to worry about running into someone you know. But however you do, I do recommend go to a sex shop. Look at the different toys, maybe buy more than one. Ask for recommendations, even if it feels embarrassing. Because trust me, these people will not be phased. Learn what kind of buzz you like in a vibrator. Maybe you like a Sonicare toothbrush zzz kind, or maybe you like more of like a bassy rumble. Learn what kind of dildo makes you excited to get home and try it. And even if you don't buy anything, just being around the helpful energy of sexually unfazed, comfortable people who are so used to being in their bodies and in touch with, I suppose what spiritual people might call their red chakra. Being around people who have such a natural comfortability with sex and all sorts of sexual behaviors, that can be healing all on its own. And it certainly was for me. Number 2, get a massage. Give yourself permission to receive touch in a professional, safe setting. It may take you a while to find a massage therapist that you're comfortable with. And if you're uncomfortable having a stranger touch you, or you're not able to afford a visit to the spa, ask a trusted loved one if they might give you a non-sensual massage, or make it sensual, follow your body. When I began deconstructing my faith, I was a young adult without a partner who was hungry for touch, starved for touch. The cells of my body craved it, while the programming of my mind told me that non-married touch was wrong. Letting myself receive healthy touch on my naked body allowed a lot of that programming to physically melt away. Let your cells learn that touch can be safe, it can be nourishing, and it can be healing. 3, smoke weed. So this one may or may not be legal where you live. And again, I disclaim that what worked for me may not work for you, because marijuana does not agree with everyone. Talk to your doctor, all of that legal disclaimer stuff. But the reason I bring it up is because cannabis can be a powerful aphrodisiac, especially for women. And real talk right now, guys, I think if I had not smoked marijuana and had sex, I'm not sure I would have learned how to orgasm with a partner. If you have trouble reaching orgasm, especially with a partner, read up on how cannabis might help you get out of your head and into your body. Again, getting out of my head and into my body was absolutely key for me. Marijuana can be a great facilitator for this, and sometimes I would get high and Uber to go get a massage, and then I'd come home and ask my partner to give me an orgasm. I eventually got to that level of comfortability with myself, my body's needs, desires, and sensuality, and I really do credit this innocent little herb, marijuana, for that. If you've never had an orgasm while high on weed, I highly recommend it. Cannabis allows many people, especially those assigned female at birth, to reach orgasm more quickly, more easily, and with more powerful pleasure than many are able to achieve while sober. Unlike alcohol, which may loosen your inhibitions, cannabis doesn't dull your senses. It often enhances them. So consider giving this natural herb a try if you haven't already. And again, don't come at me if this doesn't work for you. This is just what worked for me, and I'm sharing this to hopefully inspire you. So number 4, take a dance class. Does not have to be a pole dance class, but it could be. But learn how to move with play, again, is the object of this exercise. Unlike sports, which can have a competitive energy, dancing to music can encourage us to be in our bodies in ways we may not have been allowed to be before. I had friends who went to Christian colleges where dancing was forbidden. Why? Because it can stir sensuality. Or as the Song of Solomon says, it can awaken love before it's ready. You don't have to be a good dancer to awaken your own self-love. You don't even have to go to class. Maybe you go to a nightclub with friends, or maybe you just dance from the comfort of your living room. But be in your body. Move to music. Feel where you're awkward and stiff and silly, and breathe into it and let it go. And 5, follow your curiosity, especially your deviant curiosity. Read that erotic novel, go to that BDSM dating site, take a class on the art of Japanese rope bondage. And if these sound like too much for you, although maybe they won't, because from what I hear, the kink segment of this conference is pretty popular. But if it does sound like too much for you, that is also perfectly okay. Maybe following your curiosity is simply letting yourself indulge in a fantasy that you used to feel guilty for. Maybe it's buying a set of lingerie you have no good reason to, except for the fact that you just want it. Maybe it's letting yourself watch porn that's not straight. Whatever it is, if it involves consenting adults, let yourself go there. Learn what turns you on, learn what turns you off, play with a vibrator, read an article on ethical non-monogamy, have fun. Because play, like power, is another powerful antidote to shame. When we learn to laugh through what used to make us cringe or cry, I'm a believer that we learn to heal ourselves. So in closing, diverse journeys brought us here today, and diverse journeys will help us each heal into the people that will be tomorrow. And I don't think there is a right or wrong way to heal. I think we all must determine for ourselves what's true for us and what is not. I used to belittle my experiences because I felt they weren't severe enough to merit the label of trauma or abuse. Others, I thought, had it far worse, and many do. But that doesn't mean that I don't deserve healing from what I experienced. It doesn't mean that you don't deserve healing from what you experienced. It means that we can acknowledge the ways purity culture may have affected us so that we can finally begin to heal. It means we get to walk in our truth, whatever that means to each of us. It means that we get to be free. And thank you for coming to my presentation. Hang on, Janice, I think you might be frozen.
There we go. Oh,
there we go.
That was just wonderful. I enjoyed that so much. Those were 5 really interesting tips to offer people
thank you.
in their own recovery. Wow, that was just great. I love the one especially about dancing and getting into your own body and playing, because that is such a powerful thing to do. We're open for questions. If anybody has watched and has some questions for Alice, now's the time to share them with us.
I'm also curious to hear from you guys, if you don't have any questions, what's something that you found works for you that's helped you let go of shame and learn to have fun and be comfortable with your sexuality and your sensuality? So it doesn't have to be a question. I'm just learning from my own curiosity and to broaden my own research. Because again, I do take responsibility that these tips, they worked for me and they're going to be different for you. But I do feel like for me to give this presentation with the most integrity, I felt like I just had to stick to my personal experiences. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a therapist, I'm not even a coach, I'm not qualified, but what I am qualified for is to share my story, and you are certainly qualified to share yours. So I'd love to hear from you guys on what helped you.
Excellent. We have a question. what would be a good equivalent of your photo shoot for someone who is usually read as a male? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, so what I hear in that question is, if you're male presenting, what's an equivalent for that? I mean, dude, you can still do a sexy photo shoot, first of all.
That's true.
It's true. Yeah. No, I mean, I know me and some a girlfriend of mine, we were just at the cat convention in Pasadena because we're super cat ladies, and they had the real life men from the calendar, the firemen of this calendar. It was like a chick porn calendar of hot, sexy firemen with cats. It was fun. Point is, so I'm a person that has found healing through being sexually objectified. I'm not afraid to call it that. I understand why that's totally not going to jibe with some people. But if you're male presenting and you might like being sexually objectified, let yourself. You don't have to look like a sexy fireman, but you can say, if it's not necessarily a photo shoot, you can role play maybe, and it could even just be by yourself. It doesn't have to be with a partner. And take pictures yourself. It doesn't have to be photography, but try on and embody. Again, the key for me to stress here is embodiment. Embody what sexy looks like to you. If you had not grown up with all of that shame, how would you have wanted to present? If you'd grown up in a sex positive household, no matter who you're attracted to, how would you have wanted to present to the people that you want to attract? And let yourself feel what that's like. It could be role playing, it could be cosplaying, it could be a haircut, it could be, again, a photo shoot, it could be whatever it is. Maybe it's committing to working out, maybe it's not working out at all, and letting yourself just be as you are. It's going to mean something different to everybody, but yeah, those are the ideas that come to my mind.
And we've had a couple of other folks chime in on that. Someone said erotic role play has been a big part of my sexual liberation. And someone else said, and I do love this, walk around your house naked or wearing something that feels sexy. It doesn't have to be in front of anyone else. And I love that because that is something that I have done myself. I used to, on Sunday mornings, pull my drapes closed and turn on the music that I loved and just dance naked around my living room. And something else I did when I was on a cruise with a partner, and we had a balcony, and so nobody can see from one balcony to another. And I stood on that balcony, and I had a towel on my bottom half. I had nothing on my top half, and I just held up my hands. I was just facing the horizon. There was no one that could see me. I felt so powerful and so liberated to be able to just be myself in that.
Oh, I love this.
All sorts of things we can do. Yes, and someone else says, I fully agree with massage. It's so therapeutic. I also dated some folks with no strings attached for a few months just to try things out. And there are YouTube channels that have HFO, hands-free orgasms frequencies, all different kinds with differing efficacies. Wow, you're my kind of people.
I'm gonna have to look at this hands-free orgasm business later. Yeah, no, that's cool. I love all of these ideas.
And someone else said, feel the shame. Will you extend your boundary into the curious zone? Like just allowing yourself, and you don't have to be stuck. The shame is what somebody else gave to you. They put it on you. You don't have to hold on to it. Allow yourself to be curious and just think, what would it be like if I did this? You don't even have to do the thing. Just to imagine, just let yourself imagine. Another thing I found really helpful was, and it's not legal and not advisable for some folks, but MDMA was something where the first time, the experience I had with that, and I was in my bathing suit, I was getting ready to go into a hot tub, and suddenly just waves of self-love rolled over me, and I stared at myself and I was weeping, and I called my lover in, and he comes running in. He's like, what's wrong? And I'm looking at myself. I said, I'm so fucking beautiful. I am beautiful. Look at me. It was amazing. I mean, for someone who's always battled with weight issues and self-esteem issues, that brought incredible release to me. And we know that psychedelics are moving more and more into the mainstream with therapy. Some therapists are trained to help work with clients in this. So that's something people might want to search out as well in a therapist.
Oh, absolutely. Marijuana is just the tip of the iceberg, guys. It really is the gateway drug, but not in the way that you were warned.
That's right.
And again, it's not right for everybody, but, again, follow your curiosity and listen to your body.
I like it. Yes. Someone else has said that they have fetishized their own experience in purity culture. So that's something that they are using. Another response: having the freedom to watch porn and follow my curiosities after thinking I was a porn addict is so nice and freeing. So many possibilities. Yeah, that's true. And Dr. Ray, in our very first session, he talked about how, the sex addiction or porn addiction, those actually that's not a real thing in the DSM. So people might have compulsions, but labeling them addictions is often used against us by religious people who simply don't like what we're doing. Oh, yes. And someone else says, all those temptations I used to fear make for great role play scenarios.
They do. They do. And to kind of tie into the other comment that you read just previous, about fetishizing your experience within purity culture, one thing that I've found to be very common, I'm not sure how common it is with men or boys or people who are raised as boys, but I know it's been pretty common with people who are raised as girls, is to have rape fantasies. And a large component to why that is, that I thought was very fascinating to learn about, is because one way of looking at it, of course, everyone could have their own reasons, but one way of looking at it was we were not allowed to fantasize about consensual sex outside of marriage. And so a way to have a sexual fantasy and get off will be to fantasize that it's being done to you against your will. And that's a very normal, common fantasy. And I would be curious to hear from people brought up as boys, what type of fantasies they might have of, like, I suppose, like a male version of that. Like if there was any sort of way that the brain came up with an alternative fantasy that made it seem okay, because at least you weren't a willing, consenting partner to it. But yeah, that's a common fantasy among people who were brought up in different religious purity cultures too.
Very interesting. And people also can go back and rewatch the session we had with Dr. Stephen Davidson talking about kinks and fetishes and eroticism, because that was just such an interesting session. And
I'm excited to see it.
In with this. Yeah, it's really good. Any other questions? Any last questions for Alice as we begin winding down here? Well, Alice, I want to thank you again for being willing to be a presenter and the time and effort you put into coming up with your presentation. It was so gripping. I'm sure people will be running out to their local bookstores to order in Wayward, because it's such a fantastic book. And I recently was able to interview you on the Divorcing Religion podcast. People can have a listen to that as well. And I just want to wish you all the best at this new time in your life. You've got so much going on. So thanks for making time for us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me here, Janice. And thank you all for being here.
Okay, everyone. It's hard to believe we've come to the end of our conference here. I wanted to thank everyone for participating in the first ever Shameless Sexuality Life After Purity Culture Conference. This weekend has been a whirlwind of excellent speakers offering insights and resources for recovery from the harms of purity culture indoctrination. I invite you to follow all of our speakers on social media and to explore their websites, books, articles, and resources. You can reach out to me for one-on-one religious recovery work or to participate in the online Divorcing Religion workshop, or maybe even to be a guest on the Divorcing Religion podcast. I invite you to subscribe to the Conference on Religious Trauma YouTube channel and divorcingreligion.com to be kept up to date on all my offerings related to religious trauma and recovery, from blogs to pods to conferences. A special thanks to Sue Summers and Heather Sharp, and also to my friend Sunny, all of Sherpa Group Events Incorporated, for all their behind-the-scenes work. Visit sherpagroup.ca to find out how they can help you with your next event. And now I invite you to join us at the Shameless Cafe to get in one last bit of visiting. Whether you are a presenter or an attendee at the conference, I hope to see you at the Shameless Cafe. Thanks, everyone. Take care.